Have you ever wondered what a near-death experience really feels like? Not the way it's written in books or whispered on spiritual podcasts. I'm talking about the moment when your body begins to shut down breath by breath and you're left alone in a room that suddenly feels too silent to be safe. It doesn't begin with divine music or blinding light. It begins in the ordinary with the ticking of a clock, the mechanical hum of a humidifier, and the overwhelming weight of one truth: you're running out of air, and maybe out of time. My name is Savannah Rhodes. I was 37 when it happened. Divorced, a mother of 2 boys, a former artist who used to believe color could heal anything until life faded the color out of me. I lived on the edge of a quiet Oregon town in a small house that smelled like lavender and hospital bills. I had learned how to smile at the grocery store, how to say "I'm fine" while breaking quietly inside. My asthma had been getting worse for years, but it wasn't just my lungs. It was the invisible pressure of being everything for everyone every day. My youngest son needed specialized care I could no longer afford. My ex-husband had become a name without a voice, and I had grown accustomed to waking each day with a tiredness that no amount of rest could erase. The world still saw a woman holding it together. I knew I was slowly dissolving. That night, the tightness in my chest was sharper than usual, but I brushed it off like I always did. I had used my inhaler hours ago, emptied the last puff without much effect. My nebulizer had become less of a solution and more of a ritual. I lay on my side, blankets pulled tight, eyes fixed on the ceiling like it might speak. The air felt thick, not hot, just heavy, like the room itself knew what was coming. The sound of the humidifier hummed in the corner, pushing moisture into a room that lacked warmth. I remember reaching for my phone with a trembling hand, feeling it slip through my fingers and hit the floor. That sound, so small, was the loudest confirmation of what I already knew: I was too far gone. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I had done that too many times before. Instead, I whispered, barely audible, not even sure if it was with breath or just thought, "Please, help me." It wasn't desperation. It was release. I didn't know who I was asking: God, maybe, the universe, or simply the part of me that still wanted to live. And in the seconds after that surrender, the atmosphere shifted. The silence didn't disappear, it deepened, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full of presence. I couldn't see her, but I knew she was there. A warmth on my left side, a familiar sacredness wrapping around my body like invisible arms. Mother Mary. Not the image from childhood rosaries, not the statue. This was something living, breathing, knowing. A force that didn't require belief to be real. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. Every cell in me understood I was seen. Not for what I'd done, not for what I'd failed to do, but for who I truly was. And then came another presence, one that didn't arrive so much as it revealed itself. The air thickened, not with fear, but with power. The walls seemed to bow inward. My skin vibrated as if the molecules around me recognized something I had forgotten. He was there, Archangel Michael. Not in human form, not winged or shining, but his energy so expansive it swallowed the space. He didn't approach. He simply became the room. His presence wasn't gentle, it was unshakable, and yet I wasn't afraid. His message came not through words, but knowing. You are not this illness. You are not this exhaustion. You are not this identity. You are not even Savannah. At that moment, something deep within me cracked. My name, my roles, my pain, my history began to lift like ash in wind. I stopped being the woman gasping for air and became the awareness that witnessed her. My body trembled, but not from fear, from release. And then I felt it. The shift. Not a seizure, not sleep. I began to rise, not physically, but spiritually. I floated upward from my body like mist rising from warm earth. I didn't fall unconscious. I awakened. I hovered above the bed and saw myself still pale, clenched, but I was no longer trapped in that form. The panic, the tension, the weight, they remained with the body. I was free. For the first time in years, I was free. I looked down, not with fear, but with a strange, peaceful clarity. I remember asking, "Am I dying?" And the answer arrived immediately, not external, but from somewhere deep inside. It was my grandmother's voice, soft and strong and loving. "No, sweetheart, you're remembering. And I wept not with tears, but with presence. I knew it was true. This wasn't death, this was remembrance. I wasn't being punished. I wasn't being abandoned. I was being revealed. My near-death experience didn't come to take me. It came to strip me of everything that was never really me. I wasn't just a mother. I wasn't just a diagnosis. I wasn't just a woman who had forgotten how to breathe. I was light. I was spirit. I was a soul returning to the truth it had always carried beneath the skin. And in that sacred space, I took a breath, one that didn't come through my lungs, but through my being. That moment wasn't my final breath. It was my first real one. I didn't pass out. I didn't lose control. What happened next wasn't anything like how people imagine near-death experiences to be. There was no sudden flash or blackout. There was only a quiet continuation, like walking from one room into another without ever moving your feet. I felt myself hovering above my body, suspended in a space that wasn't sky or ceiling, but something in between. The room below was still familiar. The same bed, the same lifeless shape curled beneath the covers, the same half-empty nebulizer quietly humming into the dark, but I was no longer bound to it. I had slipped free. Not violently, not dramatically, more like a sigh that finally released after years of holding tension inside the chest. And in that suspended stillness, I wasn't confused. I wasn't scared. I was lucid. In fact, I was more aware than I had ever been before. Every detail became sharper, every sensation more meaningful. My thoughts flowed, but they were no longer frantic. I didn't feel detached from life. I felt closer to the essence of it than ever. I looked down at my body, not with judgment, but with compassion. There I was, motionless, small, worn out, and yet the grief I'd always carried when looking in mirrors was gone. That version of me lying below hadn't failed. She had simply run out of roles to play. There was no guilt, only recognition. I saw the woman who had done everything she could for her children, who had stretched every ounce of strength across years of loneliness and pressure. I saw a vessel that had absorbed more pain than it was ever built to hold. But now I wasn't inside that vessel. I was the one witnessing it from a place that felt like home. Around me, the room had changed. Not physically. It was the same layout, the same furniture, but it now shimmered with presence. I don't know how else to describe it except to say that the air felt alive. The walls weren't just walls, they were thresholds. Everything pulsed with a quiet awareness. I could feel it subtle but immense. I wasn't alone in this new layer of existence. Archangel Michael was still there, though he didn't stand in one place. He didn't move. He didn't even appear. He just was. He was everywhere at once. His energy saturated the room like music you don't just hear, you feel. He didn't need to speak. His awareness touched mine, and suddenly my thoughts began unraveling. Not with chaos, but with clarity. You are not your body. You are not your illness. You are not what they called you. These truths didn't arrive as words. They bloomed inside me like light seeping through cracks in a wall. Each one peeled away a label I hadn't realized I was still clinging to. Mother, failure, survivor, burden, they weren't me. They were just names I had worn out of necessity, like costumes in a play I forgot wasn't real. Michael didn't guide me. He simply held space. His presence was like a mirror reflecting only what was true. And in that reflection, I began to feel weightless, not just physically, but spiritually. I was no longer carrying the grief, the guilt, or the exhaustion I had buried for years. Then another presence joined us. She didn't enter so much as emerge like something that had always been there, waiting for me to finally notice. Warm, maternal, soft in the way memory feels soft. It was her again, Mary. But here in this state, she wasn't beside me. She was through me, around me, like being held inside the womb of grace. I felt her gaze not from across the room, but from within the folds of my being. She didn't ask me to believe in her. She didn't request my reverence. Her presence was simply truth, a love so vast it didn't need validation. She saw every broken piece of me without trying to fix it. She didn't tell me to be strong. She didn't whisper affirmations. She just stayed. And in that staying, I began to remember what it felt like to be held without conditions. Her energy didn't heal me like a miracle. It didn't erase what had happened, but it made it make sense. The years of struggle, the loss of identity, the crumbling of my body, they hadn't been punishment. They had been an invitation. Every wound was a doorway, and now I was walking through them not to escape pain, but to meet myself on the other side of it. This near-death experience continued unfolding not as an event, but as a revelation. Time stopped behaving the way I knew it. I wasn't moving forward or backward, I was expanding. Every second felt like a lifetime. Every breath a remembering. I began to see moments from my life not like a slideshow, but like echoes reverberating through the space around me. The night I gave up my studio to afford my son's medicine. The morning I sat on the bathroom floor and cried so softly no one would hear. The afternoon I threw away an unfinished canvas because I believed I no longer had a voice. These memories didn't haunt me now. They honored me. They weren't reminders of failure. They were confirmations of endurance. And in the presence of Mary and Michael, I saw the sacredness in all of it. Even the silence, even the breathlessness, even the collapse. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been becoming. As I floated in that space suspended between what I had been and what I was remembering, I felt one last message from Michael, not spoken, but delivered through the stillness itself. This is a divine intervention not to pull you from death, but to return you to life. Not the life you survived, the life you were born for. And in that moment, something opened inside me. Not a light, not a vision, a knowing. I wasn't being rescued, I was being returned. Returned not to who I was, but to who I had always been underneath the forgetting. A soul wrapped in form, a breath carrying purpose, a being made of light. I looked down at my body one more time and didn't feel pity. I felt reverence, because it had carried me this far, because it had never given up on me even when I had. I wasn't afraid to go back. I was ready. I didn't rush to return. There was no fear pushing me back into my body. There was only stillness, like a great exhale after lifetimes of holding in what I wasn't ready to feel. Suspended between two worlds, I realized how long I had been sleepwalking through life. Always reaching, always running, always trying to be enough for everyone except myself. But here in this strange in-between, I wasn't striving. I was simply being. And in that being, I felt whole. The near-death experience wasn't showing me something new. It was stripping away everything false so I could remember what had always been true. I was not my breath. I was not my past. I was not this illness. I was the light that had quietly endured beneath it all. Below me, the woman in the bed still hadn't moved. Her chest barely rose. Her hands lay limp against faded sheets. Her face looked soft, almost peaceful, but empty. And yet I didn't pity her. I didn't fear for her. I felt gratitude. That body had carried so much pain, and yet it had never broken. It had endured hospital hallways, sleepless nights, abandonment, and shame. It had curled protectively around her sons when they had no one else. It had whispered, just one more day, even when the soul inside it felt ready to vanish. That body deserved reverence. It was never the enemy. It was the sacred shell of a spirit that had forgotten its own name. And now I remembered. In this disembodied state, I saw not only with sight, but with understanding. I could feel the echoes of people I loved, my children, their laughter like chimes I hadn't truly heard in months. I could sense their need for me, not just my care, but my presence, my aliveness. I had become so consumed with survival that I had stopped offering them the thing they needed most, my light. But now it was back, and I didn't want to keep it locked in the sky. Around me, the space shimmered not with color, but with vibration. I could feel it responding to my thoughts. The more I remembered who I was, the more radiant everything became. It wasn't heaven, not in the way I had once imagined, but it was sacred. And then, as if called by that recognition, I felt a new presence emerge. Not Mary, not Michael. This one was different, less defined, more infinite. It was as if I had touched the edge of Source itself. There were no faces, no forms, just essence. Love not as emotion, but as being. In that moment, I realized I had never been separate from it. All my life, I had searched for love in people and art and approval. I had twisted myself into shapes for it. But this love wasn't outside me. It was what I was made of, and it had never left me. The light wasn't something I was entering, it was something I was made of. And for the first time in my life, I saw myself clearly not as Savannah, not as a name or a mother or a patient, but as a spark of eternal consciousness wearing a temporary story. And that story wasn't over. Not yet. Then something strange happened. I began to feel a pull, not forceful, but firm, a gentle current drawing me back toward the physical world. Not because I had to return, but because I chose to. I remembered my sons, their eyes, their longing. I remembered the unfinished parts of my life not as failures, but as invitations. There were paintings I hadn't yet created, words I hadn't yet spoken, truths I hadn't yet lived. I had been so busy trying to survive that I had forgotten to embody the very light I came here to bring. And now that I had touched it again, I wanted to live from it. I didn't want to return to the old version of me. I wanted to rise from the ashes of her. I wanted to become the soul that had remembered its own name. So I looked down at my body one last time, not with dread, not with resistance, but with sacred resolve. This vessel, broken and beautiful, was still worthy of carrying light. I whispered, not with lips, but with intention, I'm ready. As I began to descend, I felt the presence of Michael draw closer again, not above me, not behind me, but within me. Not to protect me this time, but to remind me the strength you felt here was always yours. And Mary, her warmth didn't vanish. It settled into my being like a second heartbeat, not watching from afar, but pulsing with me. I wasn't going back alone. I was going back remembered. The world I was returning to hadn't changed, but I had. This near-death experience didn't just show me heaven. It showed me who I was before I forgot, and now I was carrying that memory back into the life I thought I had lost. Before I floated above my body, before angels filled my room, before light returned to places inside me I thought had gone cold forever. There was the slow, silent collapse of a life. Not a collapse like buildings crashing to the ground. Mine was quieter, private. It happened in the folds of routine, in the spaces where I smiled too much and slept too little. It happened long before that night I stopped breathing. That was just the final unraveling of a thread that had been fraying for years. My marriage ended long before the papers were signed. I used to believe love was enough, that if I just tried harder, bent farther, stayed quiet longer, he would remember who we were when it all began. But love, it turns out, doesn't survive on memory. It needs breath space and truth, and we had run out of all three. When he left, I didn't cry the way people expect. I didn't throw things or scream. I folded towels, I made lunch, I put the boys to bed. I moved forward like a machine programmed to function at all costs. Only later did I realize I had left too long before he did. I had abandoned myself quietly, dutifully, and with a smile. The house grew quieter after the divorce, but not in a peaceful way. More like a hospital wing at night, sterile and humming. My youngest son needed more support than I could afford. Specialists came and went, none of them offering real solutions. Just suggestions, therapies, waiting lists. I became an expert at managing meltdowns, researching interventions, hiding our struggle from friends who didn't know what to say anymore. My days revolved around managing crises and pretending we weren't drowning. I stopped asking for help. The silence became easier than explaining the storm. My body began to turn against me, or at least that's what it felt like. At first it was just fatigue, but not the kind that sleep cures. It was bone-deep, soul-worn exhaustion. Then came the dizziness, the racing heart, the breathlessness that arrived uninvited like a thief in the night. I was eventually diagnosed with POTS. It sounded manageable, but living with it wasn't. Every step became a calculation, every errand a gamble. I learned to sit on the floor of the grocery store if I had to. I learned to cancel plans minutes before leaving the house. I learned to hide shaking hands and tunnel vision with tight smiles and quick exits. And then there was the asthma, my old companion. It had been manageable for years until it wasn't. Flare-ups became frequent, severe, unpredictable. I carried inhalers in every bag. I kept a nebulizer next to the bed like a child's nightlight. And yet, no matter how much medication I took, the panic always came. Not from breathlessness alone, but from the knowing that one day, maybe soon, it might not be enough. That one night, I might not make it to the machine in time. That fear lived in my throat constantly. I stopped sleeping properly. I started counting the seconds between each breath like I was trying to stay ahead of an invisible clock I couldn't see. I stopped painting altogether. That was the most painful loss of all. The woman I used to be, who lived in colors and shapes, who found truth in every brushstroke, vanished. My canvases stood silent in the corner, gathering dust like tombstones of a former self. I didn't stop creating because I didn't care. I stopped because I couldn't access that part of me anymore. Creation requires presence, and I was living on autopilot. I was doing what had to be done. That's all. Wake up. Keep children alive. Don't forget medicine. Don't forget bills. Don't cry at the pharmacy. Smile at the teacher. Apologize for being late. Apologize for being too tired. Apologize for being too much and not enough all at once. Every day felt like walking underwater in shoes full of sand, and no one knew. I wore wellness like armor. I knew how to look fine. Years of practice. I could fake laughter, nod at small talk, send thank you texts, compliment outfits. But behind the locked bathroom door, I sat on the floor with my head between my knees, whispering, "Please not tonight." There was no audience in those moments. No one watching me fall apart. Just me and the walls, and the hum of the nebulizer, and the silence that had grown louder than any scream. I didn't want to die. That's what I need you to understand. I never wanted to die. I just didn't know how to keep living inside a body that felt like a burning house. I didn't know how to ask for help without sounding like a burden. I didn't know how to hold the weight of everyone else's needs without disappearing under it. And so piece by piece, I did disappear, not all at once, not in any dramatic way, just slowly, quietly. I forgot what it felt like to laugh from my belly. I forgot what it felt like to be touched without obligation. I forgot what it felt like to wake up with something to look forward to. The light inside me didn't go out, it dimmed. It flickered, and I was too busy surviving to notice it was dying. Until that night, the one that changed everything, the one where my lungs finally said no more. I didn't know that night would be different. It began the way many nights had in the months leading up to it. With tightness in my chest, the quiet hum of the nebulizer beside me, and the familiar dread that came when each breath felt slightly thinner than the last. I had become used to it, this ritual of fighting for air. But somewhere deep in my body, something new. This time it wasn't going to pass. The air in the room was unusually still, like it too was holding its breath. The shadows stretched longer on the walls. My bedroom, normally a place of restless survival, suddenly felt foreign, like I was being watched by the furniture, by the walls, by something just beyond them. I was propped up with pillows, trying to breathe as deeply as I could, but nothing came easy. My lungs resisted me like rusted gates. The nebulizer had finished its cycle, a useless green light blinking into the dark. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was dense, pressing into my skin. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock in the kitchen. I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears, fast and frightened. My limbs were heavy and my head spun gently, as if I were drifting underwater. I reached for my phone, but it slipped from my fingers and landed on the floor with a sound that echoed far too loud for such a small object. I didn't try to retrieve it. I just stared at it. Not with panic, but with something quieter, a tired surrender. Not because I wanted to give up, but because something inside me had already let go. I didn't cry. There were no tears left to shed, and I wasn't afraid. Not in the way you might imagine. Fear requires energy, and by then I had none left. What I felt instead was distance, not detachment, but a kind of gentle separation. From the weight of the blankets, from the urgency of the body, from the noise of thought. It was like something inside me was stepping back, not out of fear, but out of reverence. I lay very still, aware of every inch of my being. The burning in my chest, the shallow rise and fall of my ribs, the coldness creeping into my fingers. But deeper than that, there was quiet. Not emptiness, not nothingness, but an awareness that didn't belong to the body. Like I was still in the room but no longer defined by it. My name didn't matter. My story didn't matter. What mattered was breath, and the fact that it was slipping away. Then came a moment I will never forget. The exact second where I felt my soul hesitate. It wasn't dramatic. There was no jolt, no flash. Just a pause. A stillness so profound it swallowed sound. I could no longer feel the bed beneath me. I could no longer hear the clock. I was still inside my body, and yet I wasn't. My awareness began to shift, not upward, not outward, inward, as though I was descending into the deepest part of myself, a place I had never dared to enter. A sacred silence unfolded within me like a room I didn't know I had. And in that room, something was waiting. I don't know how to describe it, except to say, it was presence. Pure presence, not a being, not a vision, just knowing. It was as if the universe had stopped pretending it was far away. It wasn't coming toward me. It had always been here. I had just been too distracted by pain, by duty, by survival to feel it. But now with everything stripped away, there it was, watching me, holding me, not with arms, not with sound, with awareness. I wasn't alone, not in that room, not in that body, not in that silence. And then I whispered, barely moving my lips, unsure if any sound even left me. Please, just let it be gentle. I wasn't begging to live. I wasn't asking to die. I was simply asking to be carried wherever I was meant to go. I wasn't clinging anymore. I wasn't resisting. My body had fought long enough. I was ready to float. I was ready to fall. I didn't know what waited on the other side of breath. I just knew. I was close. That was the threshold, not a doorway I walked through, a moment I became, the space between inhale and exhale, between heartbeat and stillness, between identity and eternity. That space, that quiet, that pause, it was holy. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. And in that truth, I was already beginning to remember. There is a kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it swallows it. That night, I met that silence. It wasn't the absence of noise. It was the presence of something ancient, waiting, watching. It began like any other episode. Tightness in my chest, a familiar pressure behind my ribs, the quiet hiss of the nebulizer humming beside me. But this time, I could feel it, something was different. This wasn't going to pass. It wasn't a flare-up. It was a farewell. I sat propped against the pillows, my body upright, stiff with effort, as if posture alone might keep me alive. The air was thick, not with heat, but with weight. I remember thinking the room looked unfamiliar, even though I'd spent years breathing and breaking down inside it. The lamp beside my bed cast a faint halo on the wall, but the shadows felt heavier than the light could reach. My fingers trembled as I gripped the edge of the mattress. I tried to count my breaths, tried to stay calm, but something deeper in me was already letting go. The inhaler had run dry hours ago. The nebulizer had finished its cycle, blinking silently in the dark. My body was refusing. My chest ached with effort, my throat closing as if to whisper, "Enough." I turned my head and looked at my phone lying on the floor, fallen from my hand earlier when I tried to text for help. I didn't try to reach for it again. I just stared at it, not with panic, but with a strange stillness. I knew I couldn't get to it, and strangely, I didn't want to. Not because I wanted to die, but because I understood this was no longer a moment to be interrupted. I lay back slowly, my breath catching as gravity pulled me deeper into the mattress. My body was tired, but something inside me was intensely aware. I could feel every inch of my being, my cold toes, the dampness of sweat on my skin, the burn in my chest. But more than that, I could feel space. Space pressing against my skin, space pressing inside my thoughts. It was as if the air around me had thickened into water, and I was suspended in it. Every sound became distant. Even the hum of the humidifier felt like it was coming from another world. My heart was still beating, but it no longer felt like it belonged to me. It felt borrowed. The fear I expected never arrived. In its place came a kind of reverence, like standing in a cathedral at night, empty and echoing. My breath, shallow and trembling, became a prayer, not a request, just a surrender. I wasn't asking to be saved. I wasn't asking to be taken. I was simply being the witnessed. And I whispered so faint I didn't know if it reached my lips. Please let it be gentle. That was all I asked for. Not healing, not answers, just gentleness. That's when it happened, not a flash, not a tunnel, just a shift, a soft and sacred turning inward. I didn't rise, I didn't float, I dissolved. Piece by piece, identity loosened. Savannah the mother, Savannah the patient, Savannah the one who always held it together. They all began to slip away. What remained was a kind of awareness that didn't belong to a person, it belonged to a soul. I was still inside my body, but I was no longer bound to it. I could feel the fabric of the sheets beneath me, the weight of the blanket across my legs, the chill on my fingertips. But I could also feel something else. The space around me no longer felt like a room. It felt like a veil, thin, transparent breathing. I didn't move, but the space did. It expanded around me, pulsing with something I couldn't name. It wasn't time slowing down. It was something more eternal, as if time had stepped aside to let truth pass through. I wasn't dying. I was remembering. There was no fear in that space, no judgment, just presence, just stillness, just the sense that I was no longer alone, not in the room, not in this moment, not in the great unfolding of what came next. Something was near, something vast, not a figure, not a voice, just knowing. It didn't speak, but I understood. It didn't touch, but I felt held. The weight of the world was gone, and in its place, silence, but not empty, full of meaning, full of presence, full of something sacred that had been waiting for me long before I ever knew how to name it. That was the threshold. Not a doorway to pass through, but a space to become. I hovered there, not above my body, not outside of time, but in the breath between breaths, in the space where the physical begins to blur and the spiritual begins to remember. My thoughts weren't racing, they were unraveling, not in fear, but in awe. I wasn't collapsing, I was softening, I wasn't vanishing. I was being reintroduced to something I had always carried but forgotten. And then just before the next shift came, I whispered again, not with lips, but with the part of me that still remembered how to speak without sound. I'm ready. And I was, not to die, but to cross. They say your life flashes before your eyes when you die. But mine didn't flash. It unfolded slowly, tenderly, like a story being read aloud by a voice I'd forgotten I knew. I didn't see scenes in a reel or watch events like a movie. I became them. I re-entered the fabric of each moment, not just the big ones, but the quiet ones too. The overlooked ones, the ones I had rushed through, apologized for, dismissed as irrelevant. They were all there waiting, every breath, every word, every silence. The review didn't come with judgment, it came with presence. I wasn't being evaluated, I was being shown. Not what I had done wrong, but what I had lived. How deeply, how consciously, how lovingly, or how distracted. I felt the ripple of every action not as reward or punishment, but as impact. I saw the way my words had reached people long after I had forgotten saying them. The way one smile I gave a stranger had softened the pain of a day I never knew they were having. I saw the time I hugged my son after his nightmare, and how that moment became the anchor for his courage months later. I saw the kindnesses I didn't even remember giving, and how they echoed far beyond the moment they occurred. But I also saw the pain I had caused, not as punishment, as understanding. I felt what it was like to be on the other side of my own walls. I saw the nights my ex-husband had stood outside the door after our fights, not with anger, but with a longing to understand. I felt the disappointment in my mother's voice when I dismissed her pain. I witnessed the loneliness in a friend's eyes the day I canceled plans, not realizing they had no one else to turn to. These weren't presented to make me feel shame. They were offered so I could hold them with compassion. So I could finally see, not from my wounded self, but from my whole self. And what struck me most wasn't the magnitude of any one action. It was the presence or absence of love in each choice. Not romantic love, but soul-aligned love. The kind that comes from remembering who you are and living from that place even when it's hard, even when no one else sees. My life review didn't care about achievement or status, or whether I had checked the right boxes. It cared about how much light I allowed through, how much truth I embodied, how fully I showed up, especially when no one was watching. There was no clock ticking during this review, no sequence to follow. Time didn't exist in that place. Everything happened all at once, and yet with space to breathe. I saw my childhood through the eyes of the little girl I once was, sensitive, intuitive, eager to please. I refelt the way I used to hold my breath around anger, the way I dulled my light to make others comfortable, the way I learned slowly, painfully to survive instead of shine. I watched myself as a teenager painting until midnight, pouring all the things I couldn't say into color. I saw how many times I had tried to speak truth and backed down, how many times I had loved with a trembling heart and told no one, how many times I had asked for help, silently hoping someone would just notice. And still, there was no judgment, just love. Overwhelming, unconditional love. Love that didn't flinch at my mess. Love that stayed. Love that said, see. Even in your silence, you mattered. I saw the day I almost didn't get out of bed, when the pain in my chest felt heavier than the future. I watched how I made a cup of tea, not knowing it would be the first thread in a long climb back to myself. I saw the day I screamed into a pillow so my sons wouldn't hear me cry. I saw how even in my weakness, I was still choosing life, choosing love, choosing to stay. And then something shifted. I began to feel not just my life, but the way I had experienced life through others. I became my son watching me struggle and still laugh at his jokes. I became a friend I'd comforted after her miscarriage, feeling how my words wrapped around her like a blanket. I became a nurse who once wheeled me into a room and felt peace from my smile. I was inside them, not just seeing but being. And in that being, I realized something I never understood while I was alive. We are never just living our own life. We are constantly living in one another. We are constantly becoming part of someone else's story. My life review wasn't a list of right or wrong. It was a mirror made of memory, a mirror that didn't just reflect me. It reflected God through me. Not a punishing God, not a distant one, but a sacred intelligence that had always been moving through my hands when I held someone through my words, when I listened through my eyes, when I forgave. It was never about perfection. It was about presence. And in that presence, I finally understood every moment matters. Not because it's big, but because it's honest. Every choice we make is a thread in a tapestry we'll one day get to touch with our soul. And when that day comes, we won't be asked what we built or owned or proved. We'll be asked, how deeply did you live? How gently did you love? How fully did you see? And in that space between moments, I said quietly, eternally, thank you. Because now I knew. I hadn't failed. I had lived. When the review of my life faded gently into silence, I expected to drift further into that vast, eternal light. I was ready. At least I thought I was. The love I had been bathed in, so total, so healing, made me feel as if nothing else could matter now. I had seen it all. I had remembered what I was. I had touched the edge of forever and felt for the first time whole. There was no pain, no pull of regret, only peace. And yet, in the stillness that followed, something began to stir. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't even a question. It was a knowing, quiet, but firm that there was more. Not more to see, not more to understand, but more to live. A quiet current began to form within me, like the turning of a tide. I had thought my journey was complete, that I had arrived at some final destination, but now I could feel something else, unfinished chords, still waiting to be played. I felt myself being gently shown what would happen if I stayed. The peaceful integration, the dissolving into the all, the return to source. It would be beautiful. It would be eternal. But I also felt something else rising in my chest, a memory not of the past, but of a promise. Something my soul had agreed to before this life even began. A vow made in silence outside of time. You will go, you will forget, and one day you will remember. And now I had remembered, which meant it wasn't over. I was being invited to choose, not commanded, not forced. Do you wish to stay or return? In that sacred question, I was not being tested. I was being honored, as if the universe itself trusted me to know what was right. And it was in that trust that I turned inward deeper than any memory, deeper than the life review, deeper than even the light, and asked, why did I come in the first place? And the answer came. Not in words, in vision. I saw the world I had left behind not as it was, but as it could be. I saw my sons growing older, their faces changing with time. I saw one of them standing in a field, hands in his pockets, carrying a grief he didn't know how to name. I saw my presence beside him, not as a ghost, not as a spirit, but as a mother still alive, still able to tell him that love is never lost. I saw myself painting again, not to prove anything, not to escape, but to heal, to express what words couldn't carry. I saw strangers I hadn't yet met whose lives would be touched simply because I had returned. I saw moments of laughter I hadn't yet had, conversations I hadn't yet dared to begin, sunsets I hadn't yet let soften me. And in that remembrance, I could offer something real. My return wouldn't be for applause. It wouldn't be for perfection. It would be for presence, to bring a fragment of this light back into the dark, to embody the love I had just experienced, not talk about it, not preach it, but be it. I thought of the body I had left behind, fragile, worn, sick, but I didn't see it the same way anymore. I saw it now as a sacred vessel, a temple carved by time worthy of carrying truth. It didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to be willing, and I was willing. And then something extraordinary happened. I saw my soul as a flame, not a flicker, but a steady fire. And I saw the world below hungry for warmth, not desperate, not broken, just ready. Ready to be touched by the kind of love that doesn't speak from a pulpit, but walks beside the weary. I felt myself leaning toward it, not with sadness, but with purpose. This wasn't the end. This was a beginning. As I hovered in that luminous stillness, I realized something else, something even deeper than memory. I had not only come to remember my purpose, I had come to feel it. The threads that had woven my story weren't broken. They were incomplete, and I was not meant to leave mid-sentence. There were still pages unwritten, still people to love, still wounds to transform into wisdom. I remembered the quiet promise I had once made to myself in a place beyond words, that I would not forget who I was, no matter how lost the world might make me feel. And that promise now called me home, not to heaven, but to earth. I thought about the quiet ones, the people still carrying burdens in silence, the ones walking through life unseen, the ones just barely holding on. And I saw myself among them, not above them, with them. I wanted to return for them too, not to save them, but to walk beside them, to speak light into rooms darkened by despair, to remind even one soul that they are not alone, not forgotten, not broken, just becoming. So I whispered once more, not with breath, but with being, yes. Let me go back, but not as who I was. Let me go back as who I now remember myself to be. And that was it. The choice was sealed, not in force, but in freedom. And from that sacred freedom, I descended with grace, with love, with memory, not to the end of my journey, but to the beginning of a very different life. It wasn't like waking from a dream, it was like falling into a deeper truth, one I had always carried but never fully lived. When I re-entered my body, I felt it all at once, the weight, the density, the rawness of breath forcing its way into my lungs like I'd forgotten how to receive air. My chest ached, my throat burned, my skin pulsed with the unfamiliar heaviness of form. But beneath the discomfort, there was a strange kind of reverence. This wasn't just survival, it was re-entry. I hadn't been yanked back, I had chosen this. I had chosen to return to the body that once carried exhaustion and fear because I now knew it for what it was, a vessel. Sacred, fragile, worn, but worthy of holding light. As I lay there, eyes barely open, I saw the room not as a hospital, but as a threshold. Machines beeped beside me, tubes fed oxygen, but I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even confused. I was aware, fully, utterly, quietly aware. The world I'd left behind had not changed, but I had. A nurse entered. Her name tag caught the light. Her voice was gentle, but her presence shimmered. I could feel her energy like a soft wind brushing across my soul. I couldn't speak yet, but I smiled, and in that smile was everything I couldn't yet say I remember. I brought something back. When my sons arrived, time folded in on itself. My younger boy ran to the side of my bed and grabbed my fingers. "You came back," he said. His words were simple, but his soul spoke deeper. I saw it in his eyes. He had felt my absence not just physically, but spiritually. And now something in him recognized my return not as recovery, but as resurrection. I wasn't just alive again, I was awake. I looked at him and I didn't just see my child. I saw the contract, the sacred agreement that tethered my soul to this world. And I knew then that my real work was only just beginning. But returning wasn't easy. No one warns you that the hardest part of a near-death experience might be what happens after. The world doesn't pause for your awakening. It still asks the same things of you. Pay the bills, answer the calls, perform, smile. And yet the self I brought back with me could no longer do those things the old way. She didn't fit in small talk. She didn't know how to numb. She couldn't pretend. The woman I once was, tired, tolerant, quietly drowning, was gone. In her place was someone softer, slower, truer. But the world didn't recognize her. And for a while, that hurt. I felt isolated inside my own transformation. The people I loved were grateful I was alive, but they didn't understand what had survived. My body healed faster than my heart could speak. And so I painted. Not for the gallery, for my healing. I walked barefoot in the yard, face tilted toward the morning. I let the tears come when they came. And I whispered to the wind what I didn't yet have words for. I'm still here. I remember. Let me live this time as who I truly am. The most sacred moments came not in grand gestures, but in the quiet relearnings. Holding my son's hand without rushing to multitask. Standing in the grocery store and watching an old woman choose peaches, realizing I could feel her loneliness in the way she touched the fruit. Sitting with a friend who didn't believe in souls and saying nothing but seeing her light anyway. The memory of the other side didn't fade. It wove itself into everything. Sometimes I would catch it in the silence between two words, in the way music made my chest vibrate, in the moments just before sleep when the veil felt thin again. But I never longed to go back, not out of fear but out of purpose. I had seen what love looked like when it wasn't filtered through wounds or conditions. And now I was here to live it, not perfectly, but consciously, to bring it into the spaces I once avoided, into the versions of myself I once rejected, into the people who still believed they weren't worthy. I realized I didn't have to do anything heroic. I just had to be fully here, present, soft, true. That alone was enough to change a room, to shift a life, to alter a future. I remembered the presence of Mary and Michael not as figures hovering above, but as aspects now rooted within me. My strength was no longer something I reached for. It was something I carried. My gentleness was no longer something I apologized for. It was how I moved, and my purpose was no longer a mystery. It was this to remember and to help others do the same. One night, not long after I returned home, I stood barefoot in my kitchen. The lights were off. The window above the sink framed the moon perfectly. I stood there in the quiet, one hand over my heart, the other resting on the counter. And I said out loud to no one and everyone, I'm still here. That moment wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic, but it was real. And in that stillness, I felt it again, the presence, the knowing, the peace. It hadn't left. It had just moved inside me. And in that realization, I made a vow I now repeat every morning to show up fully. To live like love is what I'm made of. To remember the light I saw, and to let it speak through everything I do. Before I died, I thought truth had to be loud, that the messages that could change your life would arrive like thunder, dramatic, undeniable, impossible to ignore. I thought epiphanies had to be earned through suffering or shouted from the edge of breakdown. But what I learned on the other side was something quieter, softer, something you only hear when the world inside you finally goes still. The message I brought back didn't come from a voice or a scroll or a being in robes. It came from the space between my thoughts. It came from silence that was so alive it shimmered. That silence told me things I had always known but never dared to trust. Things like you are already enough. You are already loved. You are already home. These truths weren't just for me. They're for you. And maybe the only reason I was allowed to return was so I could pass them on, not through preaching, but through presence, through remembrance, through living. You don't have to die to remember. You don't have to collapse before you rise. But sometimes the soul will allow both, just so you finally stop running from yourself. I was running before. From the weight of expectations, from the noise of failure, from the ache of trying to be everything for everyone and nothing for myself. I didn't even know I was asleep until the moment I woke up outside my body. And then I saw it all clearly. I wasn't broken. I was buried beneath years of performance, of coping, of survival. The message is this: you don't need to fix yourself to be worthy of love. You just need to strip away the layers that told you otherwise. Those layers were never yours. You picked them up to be accepted, to be safe, to be good. But they're not your truth. Your truth is light. Your truth is presence. Your truth is breath. And when I remembered that, I wept not with sadness, but with relief. Because the chase was over. I had arrived back where I never truly left my soul. Coming back to this world wasn't easy. The lights were harsh, the body was heavy, but I came back different. Not just spiritually, but biologically. I could feel things I had never felt before: the weight of a touch, the warmth of a moment, the subtle shift in someone's energy as they spoke. I began to live slowly, deliberately, reverently. I no longer rushed through conversations or meals or emotions. I let life move through me like breath through lungs. And I came back with a vow to remind others what I remembered, that you are not your job. You are not your illness. You are not the mistakes you think define you. You are not your bank account or your weight or the opinions of those who do not see your soul. You are light, wrapped in flesh. Here to grow, yes, but more importantly, here to be awake, to be love, to be now. So if you're reading this and wondering how to start, how to live like that without having to die first, let me offer this. Begin with noticing. Notice when your breath catches. Notice when your shoulders tense. Notice when you speak words that aren't yours. Wear faces that feel tight or say yes when your soul says no. And in that noticing, soften. You don't have to burn your life down to start living. You just have to come home to yourself one breath at a time. That's how heaven comes here. That's how you remember. The most beautiful thing I learned is that God is not far away, not separate, not waiting to be reached. God is in the silence between your words, in the stillness before your next thought, in the tears you shed alone in the dark. I didn't see a throne or a judgment. I saw myself clearly, lovingly, fully, and I knew that was enough. And if I could see myself with such compassion, it meant I was being seen that way all along, maybe by source, maybe by love, maybe by the deepest part of myself that had never been wounded, only hidden, and that part of you is there too. Right now, beneath the pain, beneath the pretending, beneath the exhaustion, it's waiting for your return. So here it is, the message I promised to deliver, the one I didn't know how to speak until I lived through dying and chose to come back. You're not too late. You're not too far gone. You haven't missed your chance. The life you long for isn't something you build from scratch. It's something you uncover piece by piece in stillness, in honesty, in the moments when you choose truth over performance. Let the old fall away. Let the masks melt. Let the version of you that was built on survival rest. You made it. You're here, and that is a miracle. I came back not to tell you what to believe. I came back to show you what is possible when you believe in yourself again, when you believe that love isn't something to earn, it's something to return to. When you believe that healing doesn't mean erasing your past, it means embracing the present with all of you in it. You are not broken. You are blooming, and every crack in your soul is letting the light back in.
That was the near-death experience of Savannah Rhodes, a woman who didn't just survive the edge of death, but returned with a message we all need to hear. Her story is not about escape, it's about awakening, about remembering the light we carry and the life we're here to live. If her journey touched something in you, if it made you pause, reflect, or breathe a little deeper, consider this your invitation, your reminder that your life too is sacred, that your pain too has purpose, and that maybe, just maybe, this is your moment to return to yourself. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and share it with someone who might need this message today. And let us know in the comments what part of Savannah's journey spoke to you the most. This is more than just a channel. This is a space for remembering. Until next time, stay present, stay open, and never forget, the light is already within you.